flip onto the DEIA theme that Virtual Patent Gateway is focusing on this year, how has your cultural background influenced your approach to patent law? And what advice do you have for individuals from diverse backgrounds pursuing careers in IP law?
The first piece of advice I always give people is it's not about how you've failed and why you failed, but it's about how you come back from that. And so, one thing that people always joke about in East Asian cultures, particularly, is, you're a kid, you take your test, and your parents are like, "Why didn't you get a 100? Like, why did you get a 99?" And there's this concept of perfection, which I think over time, I found that maybe it isn't so helpful to joke about that type of thing, because it leads to the model minority myth, right? Is that, oh, Asians are doing fine, they just put their head down and keep working, and that leads to kind of the model minority concept. And a lot of this comes from the fact that a lot of people from East Asia are immigrants, and it's hard being an immigrant. So for my parents, so I'm not an immigrant. I grew up in the U.S., but for my parents were, and at that time it was tough, right? It was about they had to overcome prejudice. They had to learn to survive in an environment where everything was unfamiliar to them, from the culture to the language. And, on top of that, they didn't have Google to rely on.
Yeah.
There was no safety net, right? And my parents were actually long distance for a while, but long distance Taiwan and the US. And there was no such thing as FaceTime or any other video conferencing system. They had to actually write physical letters to each other, which would
Oh,
be, right? Which would be
yeah.
delivered, 2 weeks later. And so you couldn't just pick up the phone and call someone. That was expensive. You couldn't just fly like the way that you can today. And it takes a lot of grit to be able to survive in that kind of situation, right? And there's a lot of hardship there. And what's important in all of that is not the times that you were super frustrated, or the things that you couldn't get right, but it's about how you survive that, and the skills that you learn to be able to get to the next day. um, so I tell people that life can be challenging, and each step of your life there'll be something that challenges you, right? Whether that's personally or whether that's professionally. And sometimes you'll do things and you'll feel like it's a failure, or that you can't get through it. But what's important at the end of the day is how you overcome that, right? And the fact that you are able to overcome that. And there's very few things that you can't overcome, right? In some way, shape, or form.
So do you think that that immigrant mentality has translated into your work ethic now?
I think that I have a lot of me that has that, right? Which is, always make sure you finish your work before you play. Like, why isn't
Yeah.
that perfect? And so that I actually try very hard not to keep. So like I'm kind of working on balance, and making sure that I have the appropriate amount of balance in my life to make sure that I keep my mental health in a decent form, and that I stay sane, and
Yeah,
that
of course.
it's okay. Like, I'm human. I will make mistakes. I'm not going to be as good as my boss, for example, who's been practicing twice as long as I have, right? And that's okay, and that I might make mistakes, but it's about how I come back from those mistakes, or how I make it better, or how I fix it, and not, the fact that I made that mistake to begin with.
Right. Of course.
So those are
Yeah.
things I work on,
Yeah.
which are things that I have to get over from how I was taught.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Both my parents immigrated from Iran, so I'm Persian, but I was born here. So definitely there's some of that mentality that was passed down that, you have to unlearn or, figure out how to balance in everyday life. just it's always a challenge.